Hello, I'm Callie Fell. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Bioethics and Culture. And today we are going to be diving into one of the most underreported and unregulated areas in third party reproduction or modern reproductive technology, gamete donation. So, this is egg or sperm donation. In the West, sperm and egg donation remain largely unregulated, and that lack of oversight has allowed devastating human consequences. Behind the statistics and the science are real families and real children, many of whom are left without answers, without connection, without protection. And my guest today is a mother from the United Kingdom who has spent years fighting for justice, both for her own children and others affected by the same system. After this experience, she has reached out to the Center for Bioethics and Culture and wanted to share her story. And so today we're going to be talking to her about her experience. Her story reveals deep flaws in our society and how we treat donor conceived children and donor conception, where children's rights, their well being, and identity are secondary to profit, privacy, and power. So, in this conversation, we're going to be talking through her experience, and I just want our listeners to be aware that this is going to be a sensitive topic and to take care while listening. And so, I'm going to introduce Molly, who's using an alias to protect herself. Molly, thank you so much for your courage and coming and talking with me and in sharing your story and continuing to speak up even though you've been attempted to be silenced. So thank you again for coming and telling your story so others can learn from it.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So Molly, let's just kind of start from the beginning. What's the story? What's the start?
Well, I originally come from Eastern Europe, and my region went through a war. And also, there was some domestic abuse when I was growing up. My teacher parents were not very paternal. And so there were already many, many traumas. And when I came to the UK, that continued. And then I met my future husband, a British businessman who overnight turned into a monster.
Oh.
He abused me severely, deprived me of adequate food, water, rest, sleep when I was pregnant. I also realized that he was being unfaithful literally from the wedding day. So it was horrific, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. And I had a son who, due to the abuse of me during my pregnancy, almost died at birth.
Mm.
My GP tried to help and advised me to flee as soon as the baby was born, and that he would get me in touch with adequate agencies to flee.
Mm.
My abuser warned me that if I filed for a divorce, that he would apply for child custody even when I was pregnant, as his words, only morons pay collateral maintenance to a woman because of a child, and I'm an intelligent man. And I said, how are you going to do that? You're an appalling husband, and I'm certain that you're going to be a bad father as well. And he said, I've got money. Everyone is on sale. I was like a single mother, but I was stuck abroad, no job. Eventually, when my son had just turned 2, I urged by so many who knew me to file for divorce, and I did. And he filed immediately for child custody, and he got custody straight away. It was something out of a dystopian novel. I just couldn't believe what was going on. And they gave him child custody, and he took the toddler, moved him 200 miles away almost, and dumped him on strangers.
Mm.
And my son was extremely, extremely depressed and dropped from 55 to 21% percentile in weight almost overnight. Severely depressed.
Mm.
Those are images that will never leave me. The trauma was horrendous. And then I found out that I was one of millions of mothers in the same situation around the Western world.
I'm going to stop you there just for clarification. So this was your husband that you divorced
Yeah.
from. I'm a little confused on how
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
relates.
Sorry. It is the preface to sperm donation,
Okay.
why it happened. And I'm not the only one. I've heard about at least 20 mothers who lost custody of their young children to abusers who eventually went on to have more children via sperm donors.
I see.
Do
Okay.
you
That
understand?
makes
Because of
sense. Yeah.
that enormous trauma and shock, realization that that world existed of serious misogyny and abuse of human rights that none of us knew existed in the West because the media are gagged. You understand? We were stigmatized.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
in a way, I felt like an incubator without a voice, with no rights, sort of as if I had been sterilized.
Hmm.
And I was severely, severely depressed, all alone. And all I wanted was my child
Hmm.
and to be a mother.
Hmm.
And I wanted to have a husband as well, but now I couldn't. And I just didn't know what to do. And having more children via sperm donor was the only option for me.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, and it was against me, you know, I'm fundamentally against it. And it is not good for the children. It wasn't good for me, especially abroad. It does not align with my theological beliefs. And I had to trample over all of that because I felt galvanized into something against my core values because of that secret world that I was now part of, that no woman wanted to be part of, no maternal woman. So I started looking for a sperm donor in order to be able to breathe again, to be a mother. So I embarked on looking for a sperm donor, and I Googled online. There was, I think, a couple of free websites there. And there were about maybe 50 sperm donors on one of those sites. And I went through them and looked at the details like you would. And I picked a doctor, cliche. And we were the same age. We were both 32. And he was a doctor. He was, I don't know, very good at music. I contacted him, and I had a couple of other donors on the list as well if it didn't work out with him. And we met and we chatted. We went for a drink, out for a drink, and we confirmed all the rules of the game, of the arrangement.
Any
And he said,
contract or anything on paper?
no, no.
Yeah.
But to be honest, knowing family courts and stuff, nothing is valid.
Hmm. I see.
Absolutely, absolutely nothing. I'd already had that experience.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Even with the marriage, let alone things like that. They
Right.
do whatever they want.
Right. Okay.
Well, when we first talked to each other over the phone, I told my prospective donor about a series of traumas I had been through: the war in my country, childhood abuse, domestic abuse, court trauma, and many, many, many more. Although I was not specific about the details, but I implied that there was a serious collective post traumatic stress disorder and that I struggled to trust anyone, of course. And I pleaded with him not to hurt me, to be open and honest, and to abide by the rules that we would both agree on. And he kept repeating, what you've gone through is very, very scarring, and I totally understand that. And I do not understand how your ex-husband hurt you so badly, etc. And I am an open and honest guy. And he kept repeating that.
Hmm.
He really sounded believable.
And it
And
sounded like you trusted him enough to go forward.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, despite my traumas and recoiling from almost anyone, from being hurt, in the end, I trusted him. And then, having followed the campaign against anonymous sperm donation, the reason why I chose unknown donor was so that all the questions that my children would have, about their genetics, and their father and his family one day and the siblings would be forthcoming,
Mm-hmm.
just an email or text away. That was extremely important to me and to my children, because I had done lots of research.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that anonymous sperm donation was extremely detrimental for the children in question.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have never chosen that, having read those testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I chose a known donor, and I was very happy about that decision, given that all the information would be forthcoming. But everything was there. And the evening we met, I drove to his town and we met. We had a drink in a cafe bar and we reiterated all the rules of the arrangement, that he would have only 5 families through a private donation, that he had been blocked through the fertility clinics for exceeding the 10 family limit, so that was closed, and that he would keep a thorough list of all the siblings, and hopefully, if the mothers agreed, introduce them to each other and stuff, but that he would also have his own family and children who would always be his priority, of course, and that he would let me know that he was settling down, that he would be settling down and having children straight away, so that my children were brought up with that knowledge. That was my stipulation,
Mm-hmm.
so that they all feel like they're first best, all of them together within that recipient group. And he said, oh, definitely, I'll let you know. And in that case, that could be possible, that we bring contact forward and that he start to bond with those children that he would have with the recipient mothers. And I said, well, that's great. So we reiterated everything and we had sex, and I got pregnant straight away. And 9 months later, I had a daughter by him. That was 2000, the end of 2005.
Mm-hmm.
In 3 weeks, she's going to be 20.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I had a daughter, and I emailed him and let him know. And he said, I'm very happy for you, and
Did
stuff
you
like
guys
that.
talk at all during the pregnancy? Was he involved at all, or was it like you?
Maybe no. Maybe we exchanged a couple of texts. I would
Okay.
text him, how are you? How is everything? How is everything going? No,
Okay.
sorry. When we were discussing the arrangement, he said that he would have only 5 families, and I said, considering that sperm donors are quite scarce, I presume that is going to end very shortly in 2005, maybe mid, because we met Valentine's Day, ironically, 2005. And I said, I presume that you are going to stop donating mid 2005, like in a few weeks or months. And he said, I think so.
Hmm.
And so during my pregnancy, I would check sperm donor websites. And he said that once he's had 5 families, that would be almost certainly mostly with lesbian couples, artificial insemination, and maybe one or two through an intercourse. Once he's had those 5 families, he would take his sperm donor advert off the websites.
Mm-hmm.
That was the agreement, and my firm stipulation: not over 5 families.
And that's beyond the 10 families that he already assisted through more official channels, through like the
He
clinics.
Yeah. He'd
Okay.
had 10 families via the clinic. And then at the last minute, when we were in his room, he said, can I just ask you something? Like a little child. And I said, yeah. Can I ask you, what about if I have 6 families?
Mm.
And I said, you didn't say that before. Why? Well, there are so many nice families needing a donor. I will stick to 5, but maybe only one more. If I really, really find a family, a lesbian couple or a single mom who are very, very nice, the sixth one, but it doesn't mean that it will happen. And I was looking at him, I said, you have to understand the seriousness of the
Mm-hmm.
situation that you're dealing with real children. And please stick to 5 families. But if you really, and he said, I wanted to let you know, I didn't want to like betray you. He wanted to give the impression that he was being honest and open and didn't want to present me with fait accompli. And I said, all right, 6 maximum. And please do not hurt me. I've had more than enough on my plate. And he said 100%. So during my pregnancy, I would track the sperm donor website, and he was always on there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as the need for sperm donors was increasing, with more and more lesbian couples wanting a sperm donor, single mothers using donors incrementally more. There were more sperm donor websites emerging as well. And he added his profile to all of them. There were not that many then, maybe 2 or 3 at the beginning, but still, that is not what we had agreed. And then I would text him and I would say, why are you there? I'm really sorry. This is not what we agreed. And this is wrong, both towards me and towards the children. And you're endangering them. That it's not nice on any level. And I would like to ask you, have you fulfilled your quote of 5 families? He said, I think he said that he had fulfilled his quota, but I'm so busy, I haven't had the time to take my profile off. I said, you've added your profile to some other website. So it's not a mistake. And he said, oh, I'm going to take it off. And so a few months later, again, I checked, he was still on there.
Mm.
And he would even embellish his adverts, meaning that he was still active.
Right.
And I found that extremely distressing.
Mm.
I had been fooled and tricked and conned by so many in my life, and that now someone else I trusted with a life-changing decision of that kind had tricked me again.
Mm.
I found it extremely, extremely difficult. And I found it embarrassing and worrying about my child. And I didn't confide into anyone. I wanted to keep it for myself. But I only told my mother and my grandmother in my country. And then I gave birth to my daughter. And after that, he was still everywhere.
Mm.
And we started to bicker in emails and texts. I was really adamant about my decision and our agreement. And he would vehemently deny breaching our agreement, as his portrait was just on there because still he hadn't had the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just anything just to get rid of me.
Mm.
And then
Did you tell your daughter, like, what was your relationship like with your daughter? Were you always open about the fact that she was?
no, no,
Mm.
because it turned out that he was something didn't make any sense with him. Something was shady with him, and I didn't know what to tell her. And I started asking him, can you please get me in touch with some of the mothers so that the siblings meet early? And he said, I've asked them already, they're all refusing.
Mm.
And things like that all the time. So I thought, if I tell her and she is desperate to meet her siblings, and then he lies about something, I just didn't know what to say. Plus, I was going through course for my eldest son. And there was lots of turmoil. So I honestly didn't know what to do. And then I decided, because my daughter was very lonely when my son was not visiting with
Sure.
us.
Does your
And
daughter know now as a 20, almost 20-year-old?
yeah, she does. I had another child by the doctor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, not another child. Yeah, a boy. and because my daughter was very lonely and missed my son a lot, and I wanted him to be by the same father.
Mm,
And then an article emerged in a newspaper by a mother, and was she was holding a child, and that child looked was a spitting image of my daughter.
mm,
And her story mentioned a hospital doctor, and it's very similar to mine. I knew straight away that it was him. So I contacted him and I told him about that, and he said, "Oh yeah, I know." And I had an impression that they had, and he said, "But it is not her name, and it's not the child's name." And I had an impression that they had concocted that together to sell the story for money. And I said, "You know what? What really concerns me is that you've got the media involved, and if the story breaks, you will be all over the papers, and it can damage your reputation as a doctor. A doctor going around sleeping around with random women and fathering children,
mm,
and it would also scar us
mhm,
and the children." Yeah, I said, "What are you doing, man? It's just surreal. What kind of behavior is that?"
mhm,
And he was giggling like a child. And I said, that's a very wrong thing to do. And he said, "Oh, it doesn't matter, and she needed the money and stuff like that." I said, "Can you get off those sites, please, and start introducing the siblings to each other?" "Oh, yeah, yeah, I will." And then we met again, and again he was a bit bossy, and we had a bickering about that as well. And then I got pregnant, and I had a boy. More sperm donor websites for donors emerged, and again he was everywhere. That was 3 years after we met. It caused me enormous distress. And even before that, with my daughter, before I had my son, I went to my country and I decided to offload in front of my mother and grandmother. And I said, this, her father is having children all over the place. And I sometimes cry, I don't know what to do. And they were looking at me, and my grandmother said, "Listen, I am illiterate. And I am certain that that man is not a doctor, he's some con man.
mm,
If I think that is so bad, both for himself and for the children, no normal doctor would embark on something like that." And she said, "He's not a doctor." And then my mother said the same, "He's not a doctor." And I said, "He is a doctor, I swear." "No, he is not a doctor." And it remained at that. They didn't believe it. Not only them, later many. And so I had my son, and then more websites, and he was everywhere. Then I joined Facebook, and many Facebook pages for donor conceived offspring and recipient parents, and you name it. As you know, they were everywhere. And I joined them all, and I read more testimonies by donor conceived children, and got even more and more distressed when they were saying that, especially when they went to university at that age, some would get paranoid about inadvertently getting involved with their siblings.
mhm,
It's just my worst nightmare. Something that I tried so badly to avoid was, in a way, thrown at me, and everything was uncertain. So I would email him every couple of months, and sometimes we would chat via emails for days. And then he would say that he had not found his Mrs. Right yet. And I said, "Have you met any of the children?" And he said, "No, definitely not." And I said, "Please count us in if you ever start that,
mhm.
and be mindful of all the children." "Definitely, definitely. Oh, I would never do anything else." And then we would talk. We would talk generally about current affairs and stuff like that.
Well, and not
And
to mention, you bring up the risk of half siblings, which is a very real risk, especially when we hear of sperm donors having 700 children, genetic children, or more cases of that. So there's the very real risk of meeting and having a romantic relationship with a half sibling.
Yeah.
But there's also, half of their medical history they won't have access to, right? His medical history, his family's, you know, health conditions, all of that is really important for donor conceived individuals.
Oh, definitely. Well, that is why I chose a known donor, because he said that there were no serious conditions in his family and that he was healthy himself,
Mm,
which I do not doubt. And that if any concerns about any medical problems emerge, that I would just simply text him and get a reply within minutes
hmm,
or a couple of hours. So that was the whole point of choosing someone I knew.
mm,
And so now I insisted on the meeting other moms. I asked for that mom who appeared in the newspaper to
mm,
meet her, and he said she's refusing.
hmm,
I was very, very hurt, especially as I knew how important it was that the sibling started meeting up early and forming bonds. And then I said, "Are you keeping the list, the promise list?" Oh,
mm,
definitely, definitely. He said that at the beginning. When are you going to give it to us? Soon.
hmm,
And also, before the children, my daughter was conceived. Well, that evening, I asked him before that even, and again, when I first met him, I asked him to send me a photo of himself as a baby, that my child would love to see that. And he said, definitely, because now he was working in another town. But when he went to visit his mom, he would get his baby pictures and send them to me.
hmm.
So that was not a problem.
When
Years passed,
I don't
nothing.
know, I don't know why I'm thinking of this right now, but when did you tell your daughter? How old was she?
I told my daughter when she was a few days before she turned 9.
Okay. And the same with your son then? Now that
And well, he was 3 years younger.
okay.
So he was 5 actually then,
Okay.
3.5 years. And he was 5.5, and she was about to turn 9. And I had printed a photo of him before that for a few years, and I put it next to my bed, and I would sometimes tell them, this is my good friend, and I would call him by the name. And he is a clever man, a doctor, and like he is a nice man, to just to prepare them
Mm,
to get used to him. So we would talk about him, but they didn't know that he was their father,
hmm,
because I thought that they would ask to meet him, and then who are they meeting? Everything was a mess.
hmm.
I genuinely didn't know what to do. If it was a straightforward man and everything was straightforward, and he had stuck to our rules, I would have talked about it much earlier. But now I felt stuck. Would I harm them or not? Or what do I do with a liar?
Yeah. Well, I'm finding this industry, nothing is straightforward. The
Well, with
longer I work in it, the more I believe there is nothing straightforward
no.
about third party conception, which is what this is, a third party or donation, egg and sperm donation. There's nothing that is straightforward. And so what did he's been a donor despite your agreement not to be. Do you have any idea how many biological children he has?
Well, no, not even an inkling.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was also part of the agreement, that he would divulge all the information about the number of the siblings and where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And he was silent about that. And I insisted, and then he would tell me, he would sometimes virtually blackmail me.
Mm.
If I mentioned a colleague who was in her 20s, he would insist on me passing his number to her to impregnate her.
Wow. And despite
Uh,
his silence and his unwillingness to share, have you been able to connect with other women or
no,
couples?
no.
No.
And he continued. Years passed, 5, 10 years, and he was adding his profile to all the websites. on some websites, there would be mothers who would say, "Oh, I've just had a daughter by him. I've just had a son who is a brother for my daughter," and on and on and on. The number was staggering. I would just sometimes literally burst into tears.
Hmm. I'm
And
just
then I would
surprised
feel
that you haven't been able to connect with them via like social media with these
he's
groups.
extremely controlling,
Hmm.
extremely controlling. And then, yeah, when I told my daughter, and she said, I would like to meet my siblings and him, but siblings especially. And I
Hmm.
said, the mothers are refusing
Hmm.
to meet up. And that was also weird. And then one day I posted on one of the groups with thousands of recipient parents and donor conceived children. And then once I posted a question on the support sites, like my donor lives abroad and he is extremely obscure with any facts. I think that he's lying to me. And he says that no mother wants to meet up with the other mothers and that they are dangerous or whatever. Something doesn't make any sense. And what shall I do? What shall I tell my children? How do I protect my children from this? Because it is going to scar them. How long is he going to do this for? And while many donor conceived children were on my side and they said he should divulge all the information, and especially about the siblings now, before too late, that is really selfish of him to do. A few mothers, recipient mothers, gagged up against me and called me names, shut your gob up and stuff like that. And it crossed my mind that they were his, whatever I can call it, and that they may be meeting up with him and like some kind of arrangement that resembled maybe with children if he met them harem or whatever. I honestly don't know how to call it. It crossed my mind. I didn't know if it was true.
Hmm.
And then I asked him, are you sure that you're not meeting any of the mothers? You haven't met any of the mothers and the children? Oh, positive, 100%. I've never met a single of the children. And I said, but years ago, you were desperate for children. And he said, I fulfilled that need by going to visit my brother and his children. But I haven't met any of them of mine because I would like to have my own children. And
They
and
are his
then,
own children.
yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah.
And then he said, oh, yeah, my daughter was 9. And I told my children, this friend of mine in the picture is your father.
Wow.
And their eyes filled with tears. I decided to tell them, but I just didn't know what I was doing, considering what he was like.
Yeah. And how are they doing now with this information?
Well, it is not that simple because for years, from about the age of 9, yeah, until almost 15, I told the donor that I told my children. And now we would sometimes email about them and they would read the emails.
Mm.
And I would ask him, they are really desperate to meet their siblings. I am pleading with you to introduce us to some of the siblings. And he said, none of the mothers want that. I'm really sorry. And then years later, yeah, my daughter was desperate. She was about maybe 12 or so. She would watch some videos about donor conceived children on YouTube and run up to me and show me a video on her mobile and with tears in her eyes, like, look, a donor conceived girl has met her brothers and sisters, and tears would be in her eyes. It was very poignant. And I said, and she said, but one day that is going to be me. And I said, oh, of course, we are waiting for him, to find mothers who agree to that, and you'll meet your siblings. So they were talking about this all the time.
Hmm.
So I constantly kept asking and asking and asking. And I said, are you sure that you have not met any of the children? Definitely not. I am in the Caribbean, thousands of miles away from you. I have not met. When I start meeting the children, I will let you know and I'll start meeting them all.
Yeah.
And we plan
I'm
to buy him
surprised
a
that
tent.
these children, now that they're becoming older, haven't taken this into their own hands. I mean, like with 23 and Me and Ancestry.
Well, yeah, let me tell you, he One day on the support side, there was a lesbian couple who said, our donor has just stayed with us from abroad, and they had 5 children by him. And he stayed from abroad, and he's like a family to us. For years, he's been visiting us, and he's extremely close to our children, and they are close to him. But he's overstepped the mark. He behaves like one of us and has upset that lesbian relationship. How do we set boundaries without hurting them? And I froze. I thought that it was him. And then I emailed him, and then I said, are you sure that you have not met any children when you were in the UK? And he said, positive, positive, definitely not. And then I relaxed. He said he had not met a single of the siblings. And then my children would sometimes, their eyes would well up. He said, when are we going to meet him, and when are we going to meet the siblings? It's becoming too late. And I said, don't worry, he has not met any of the siblings, so you are all in the same basket. It's not that he's discriminating only against you. Definitely, I said, definitely, he's meeting his brother's children only, and he will let us know when he's ready. So one day they wanted to write him an email. Oh, yeah, they would do posters and cards, and I would take a picture for Father's Days and for his birthday or Christmas, and we would email him their posters and birthday cards. And he would mainly say thank you very much, or sometimes he would not, and they would feel hurt. I always wanted to keep that bond going, a little even tenuous bond for later. At 14, I also told my daughter and son what heritage they were, according to what he told me.
Mm-hmm.
And we celebrated that half of their story, of their heritage, their ID. And they told their friends in school, and when they did a family tree at school, that they were half from my country, half from of his heritage and stuff. When they were 14, no, about 12, my daughter was really, really down about, frustrated about not meeting any of the siblings, and asked to become member of the DNA site to try to, we decided to take the matter into our hands.
Sure.
And I put her DNA on my heritage and all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Not a single sibling turned up.
Wow.
Yeah, unbelievable, honestly. We were so hurt. But we found out that he did not have 1% of the heritage he told us.
Oh.
And that was a huge shock and a blow to us.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I had asked him even before the children were conceived about his heritage to bring them up with that knowledge.
Right.
And I had been deceiving them throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, my daughter was about, I think, 12 when we found out their true heritage, and that there was not even 1% of the one he'd given me.
Wow.
It's astonishing, honestly, to
Yeah.
play with something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really hurt.
Yeah.
And then, I would tell him, this is unacceptable behavior, what you're doing. They're still your children. Why would you treat any children like this, let alone your own flesh and blood?
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't care.
Yeah.
And I said, could you please finally introduce us to the siblings? And he said, definitely, they're all refusing, and I've never met any of them. I am only in contact with you. Every couple of months we exchange pictures and emails, lots of pictures of the children. He asked me to send him pictures of the children. And so the children wanted to email him in the Caribbean, like, hello, we wanted a direct contact, not only to read the emails that I was communicating through with him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would ask him sometimes, have you met, definitely for them, have you met any of the children? My children are asking, they're really hurting. They're watching videos on donor conceived children. And please be honest about this. And he would reply in an email, definitely not. Your daughter is one of the oldest, and she will be trailblazing for all of them.
Hmm.
She will be the first to invite because I'm the closest to you.
Hmm.
And I would show my children emails like that to reassure them, and they would read.
Sure.
And then they told their friends, that my daughter especially, that she had many siblings and they were going to meet one day and they were going to be a big family. I told my friends that as well
Hmm.
in the end.
Yeah. And
And
still to
then
this day, they have not met him.
I accidentally found out, very accidentally, it slipped from him because he couldn't keep track of what he was telling whom, that he had almost throughout since we met had been meeting children that he'd picked up. I understood that those children were mostly from well-off families,
Hmm.
and I'm not, after all my traumas and, my court case and my parents being a nightmare and everything, my situation was completely different. Although the children were very good at school and academically ended up in a selective academic school for talented children, but we didn't have money. And I found out that my impression was that he'd picked up children from posh families. And also, as I was insisting on meeting up and all of us together with him, he had never had a family. He started blackmailing me for sex. That if he were to meet my children, I would have to sleep with him at the end of the day. And I said, definitely not. But why? But why? Yes, I we never agreed to that. We had sex 13 years ago, so 11 years, whatever. When we meet our partners, spouses, I hope to find someone one day. It's even we are not each other's threat, and even better. I do not want to mix those two worlds anymore.
Right.
And that's it. And I'm not going to. What do you mean to go from one mother to another and sleep like that? What is that? Is that a harem or on a rota like a lazy Susan? And then we would argue, and he said, why are you like that? I said, what do you mean? I'm not going to agree to that. I'm not going to sleep with you. You should meet the children without any strings attached to it, and move the focus from me onto the children, and then I'm never going to meet them, and stuff like that. And then I would cry. It was very distressing for me,
Yeah.
and it was constantly like that for the last several years. And then I accidentally found out that he had been meeting up when coming back to the UK every, I think, at least once a year, but for a long time he would stay a month and a half or so. And that he had literally picked up like Swedes children, like pick some up, they are of good quality, and yeah, the others throw in the bin. It's just a mind-boggling attitude towards human beings.
Hmm.
It really, really, really hit me. It disgusted me. And when I first found out that he had been seeing children and lying to us, catfishing us for 15 years, 15 years,
Yeah.
dozens and dozens of emails of him reassuring us that he had never started seeing any of the children. And now I started to scream. I got so depressed that I couldn't work. I was bedridden for several months. Believe me, I had already been scarred more than enough. But now, like, how is this going to affect my children, my grandchildren one day?
Hmm.
That he's been doing this is segregating them,
Hmm.
sidelining them for what better quality children. And he told me that the real reason, well, he implied that I was not successful enough for him. And then he said, but the main reason was you were refusing to sleep with me and the other mothers met my needs.
Wow.
Yeah. It was something. It happened 6 years ago, in at the end of October 6 years ago. and I am still not over it.
Yeah, I don't know how you could be over something like this, how your children could be over something
The
like this.
children, when I firstly started screaming when I found out about it, and because my mother in a way rejected me. She was a teacher but not motherly, so I know what rejection by a parent meant
Mm-hmm.
and how scarring it is. I'm still scarred by that, by my mother rejecting me.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents, while I was bringing up my children, my parents rejected us again and banned us from going to my country because my father thought that his wife should look after only him and didn't want children around. And my mother said, you know that I'm not motherly anyway. We prefer our own company and just to hear that you are all right. So can you imagine other foreign families going to their families and children to their grandparents during the summer, and we staying behind? So we had already had that scar, and he knew about it. I told him about he knew about what my parents were doing. And I had asked him so many times to introduce us to the siblings so that would ameliorate the damage that my parents had done to my children. And he was still abusing them and lying to them. It's absolutely sickening. And I was just like, oh my God, how am I going to live with this? I got severely depressed. I needed medical help. I had to pay for a very expensive school bus for the children. They were in another town in a special school for gifted children or whatever that I could hardly afford anyway. And now I couldn't even work. I couldn't get out of bed. Yet there was no one to help me financially. So I borrowed money from the bank, got into debt. I could barely do anything for the children, the basics. I remember Halloween pumpkin rotting, several that I had bought. We hardly had Halloween or Christmas. And then I had to tell my friends, a few friends that I had here, what had happened. Oh yeah, I got stress-related hives. My face was all swollen and itchy and painful, and my hands everywhere. My eyelids were swollen, and whoever saw me couldn't recognize me. Like, is that you?
Mm-hmm.
It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. I became even suicidal.
Mm.
I became suicidal. You know, that someone rejects your children like that and accepts, I don't know how many, he wouldn't tell me. And guess what? When I found out that he had always been seeing other children,
Mm.
one of the family who he was seeing were those lesbians with 5 children. So it was him.
Yeah.
And they had posted about him years before, but he had denied that it was him. It
Mm.
was him.
Yeah.
And then one of the mothers who he had an affair with and had a child sued him, and he appeared anonymously in all the papers. And the judge said anonymously, no names were revealed. He asked for that, and the judge said that I think that he mentioned that a lesbian a couple, and that he had slept with both of them. So he went only saw the children where he could get sex at the end of the visit, like he told me. And it was such a huge blow. And the children, well, they heard me screaming and they came to the room and said, like, what is it? Asked me, what is it? And I said, his name. He has been seeing some other children for years, and their eyes welled up full of tears. I will never forget that. And they were just staring at me. And then my daughter started pacing up and down the room and screaming,
Mm.
how could you choose him? What kind of a doctor would agree to something like this? And then put all the blame on me because she was in pain.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, why didn't he tell us the truth earlier, or that he was rejecting us, and not now when I'm 14? This is the worst time. And she was hormonal, and It was just horrendous, honestly,
Yeah.
horrendous. And then she said, at least I do not want to see him ever in my life. He's a dangerous man. And obviously he planned to fool us forever. You've accidentally found out about this, but if you had not, he would have fooled us forever if he did not let it slip, which is true. That prospect of him planning to do that to us, he enjoyed fooling us and tricking us and catfishing us, playing
Hmm.
games. And now that game was over, and my daughter said, can you please ask him to get me in touch with any of the siblings, even the ones that he's been meeting, because it's not their fault, so that we could mitigate the nightmare that we were in.
Hmm.
And I asked him, the children would like to meet their siblings now to try to learn to live with what you've done, the damage. And he said no, still. And I said, why? Why not? Any of there must be some mothers, even, and some other children whom you've rejected, and the mothers who have not been sleeping with you because obviously he didn't want to, God knows what he'd been doing, maybe pretending that he was, some of them must have agreed to it and knew what they were doing, but some of the others, I'm sure, were tricked into it, and that he may have told them that they were his only partner and children, and God knows
Sure.
how many of them. It was, God knows what such a
Right.
man could do. And I said, what about the children that you've rejected? If you think that we are paupers, then pauper children, whatever, it doesn't matter what class they are, introduce us to someone,
Yeah.
because we are really, really down, and we have to find a way to feel, to learn to live with this. And the only way is to that you introduce us to at least one sibling. It doesn't matter who they are. And he said, no, I offer that your children meet me. That was the first time he offered that without sex with me. For years, there would always be a stipulation that I had to sleep with him. And I said, so he said, I would meet up with them, but I think he mentioned that I was not allowed to turn up. He didn't
Oh,
want to see me.
that's
And I said, they are not going to meet you. Mark my words, neither do they want it nor me. You are a very, very dangerous man. What you've done to them is absolutely horrendous.
hmm.
And can you please? And then I asked him, can you tell me, have you been sending frozen sperm around the globe? And he wouldn't reply,
Mm.
which added to my distress. Can you imagine that?
No.
And then my daughter,
I don't think
you,
people realize that you can ship gametes, sperm and
yeah,
eggs, embryos around the world, that that's a very real possibility.
well, I had seen an interview on a UK program this morning by a brother and sister who had met later, by a sperm donor who had shipped his sperm all over the world. He told some mothers and couples that he would have only a few families, but then he shipped his sperm, and they found out that he had in excess of estimated 10,000 children.
Whoa. That's
And
the
now,
most I've heard of.
oh yeah, it was on this morning in the UK.
Wow.
And like they asked him, how many siblings do you think you've had? I think that they had tracked down about 3,000 or so. I can't remember the details exactly, but, and they said, we reckon in excess of 10,000. And they're in all over the world, in the States, in Switzerland, France. So they send their representatives, siblings, to many countries to go on TV and to ask parents to tell their children that they were donor conceived, so that they could meet as many siblings as possible.
Mhm.
And having seen that, I got so alarmed, my God, rash everywhere, heart palpitations. I had to have beta blocker, antidepressants. I literally could not walk. I hardly slept for many, many days.
Yeah.
And I said, have you been shipping frozen sperm? To this day, he hasn't replied.
Mm.
Uh,
So I mean, this is just a horror story with so many awful components to it.
yeah.
What would you like to see? Like, what's the perfect world for you for this type of practice for donor conceived people, for families.
All the geneticists and fertility experts I later read from all over the world state Britain as an example of a regulated gamete business. I think that it cannot be further from the truth.
Right. And even
And
if it was regulated, to the T or whatever, you're still not protecting children from the harm and the emotional
yeah,
toll of
yeah,
being donor conceived, of what you talked about earlier, of being deprived of knowing your other siblings, of being deprived your genetic history, your lineage, your medical history, all of that.
yeah.
Regulations won't protect children against that at all. So even
But
if it
why
was,
ostensibly they introduced that 10 families per family in 2005 when I started off during those campaigns against anonymous donation. And everybody, including parents who use those IVF clinics, believed, and many still believe, that it is statutory.
Mhm.
10 families per donor. It is too many families. It should be reduced. But it's not even 10 families. There are loopholes there
Right.
deliberately left to abuse the system. And then I researched and researched and researched, like, what could it be? And then I emailed the board, the office of the organization, and I said, now I'm going to go to the papers. I'm going to go anywhere. I want to find out whether he's been using your clinics for a decade after being blocked from them. I'm going to write to the health department minister and stuff like that. And I said, this is a form of child abuse, if it's true. And their executive called me, and my perception was that she wanted to intimidate me.
Mm.
And she started shouting at me, like politicians,
Yeah.
that straw man argument. We are responsible. We test for sexually transmitted diseases, blah, 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 blah. The platitudes all beating around the bush. And I said, and she was shouting and shouting at me, intimidate me. And then I
Hmm.
said, can you just tell me if there are any loopholes? No, we are very strict about that. Every donor gets blocked after 10 families. So how did he have several sets of twins years after being blocked from them?
Right.
We are not allowed to discuss. And
Mm.
then I said, can you please tell me any example of how a donor could possibly find maybe loopholes or whatever? And then in the end, when I insisted, she said, well, he can say that a woman is his partner. And I said, and change a partner every week. Yes. Can you imagine?
No.
That is,
Awful.
yeah, that's she told me. And I said, oh, so that is one of the loopholes left there deliberately for those perverts and highly promiscuous men who want to have hundreds of children. And they can go in every few days and say, this is my partner. Next week, this is my partner. In 3 weeks, this is my partner. Unlimited. And she said,
Right.
yes. And I said, this is not a joke. These are children's lives.
Mm.
And then I found out another loophole through my research and putting two and two together: affiliated fertility clinics from abroad. I understand that all UK clinics have got affiliated clinic from abroad that they are somehow aligned with or whatever, and that a British woman, can go abroad, and I think in the States or Turkey or whatever, to an affiliated clinic, to a UK fertility clinic, and use the same donor. That donor, but who is British and in Britain, and who's been blocked from British clinics, but now because he donates in the States or wherever, or possibly the paperwork is in the States and abroad, but he's still in body in the UK, as far as I understood, and that is one of the loopholes. And I asked this woman, and she was just like, again, we are responsible, we care. But I said, is this another loophole? Well, I don't know what she said about that one, but she was shouting and shouting. They were panicking.
Yeah.
So obviously there is something to it. And then the next day, on a Saturday, she called me from home, and she said, I apologize for being very rude to you yesterday. And then she said, can I just ask you something? you obviously campaign and you're vociferous about it. Can you go to your MP and ask for him to raise this question and for these loopholes to be closed?
Mm.
I said, why don't you do that? Why would I do it for you? And she said, well, that's not how it goes.
Mm.
I said, why? Because your friends, doctors who want to milk fertility clinics for profit, would fall out with you? And
Mm.
she said, I understood, yes. And she said, please go to your MP and you ask for the loopholes to be closed.
Mm.
Can you imagine? And then I wrote letters. I wrote a letter to the health department chief. That was during COVID. And I told him about all this. And I said, you are in charge of fertility clinics. There are loopholes there that need closing as soon as possible. I would like to know whether my donor has been having an unlimited access to your fertility clinics for a decade after being blocked from them. I think it is in the public interest to know. And also, parents who use your clinics for IVF have the right to know. Because I posted on some sites then for IVF, I said, are you aware that some donors can have unlimited access and produce an unlimited number of children? And I was attacked. Like, that's rubbish. That's not true. It's a serious organization that protects children. That's not possible. They would never allow that. They panicked.
Yeah.
People are being kept in the dark.
Well, the
And I'm,
fertility industry doesn't have the best interest of children at heart at all.
no, no,
Point blank.
not at all.
Yeah.
And then I wrote all that in the letter, like clients of those fertility clinics, as far as I can say, they all think that it is statutory.
Right.
Even the police thought so. And it's not. So I pointed that out in my letter to the health minister. And I said about unregulated private sperm donation that was scarring a huge number of children. I then read tons of other articles about extremely highly prolific donors having hundreds of children, 800, 1,000 in the UK alone, abroad even more. And then I got onto sperm donor support groups. And you wouldn't believe the conversation. They are literally sick perverts. They were competing with each other like it's only sperm, don't worry, relax, it's only sperm, it's not a big deal, posting some slogans or whatever, and then how to sleep with a woman, and then how many children have you got, mate? Oh, I've got a 600, I've got 800, I've beaten you. They were competing.
Wow.
It was absolutely
That's
chilling. So
vile.
yeah, I
Yeah.
wrote all that down and I said, these are children.
Mhm.
The rights of the child, I'm sure, cover all this, and you have to make it all statutory and these perverts to be cut down to size and stopped. And then I also said that what I'd read, that some of them had hundreds of children, but their wives didn't even know about a single child, and they went around the country sleeping around and basically ridiculing their wives and children. And I said, doing that behind your spouse's back and on that scale is in a way a sexual assault, a form of domestic abuse. Something similar was done to me in my marriage, and I'm scarred for life. And
Mhm.
I said, can you please take all this into account and start regulating?
Yeah.
And he replied to me, Lord Bethel, in charge of the health department back then. Matt Hancock was, but Lord Bethel replied, government cannot regulate private sexual behavior. That was the answer.
Right.
He did not mention fertility clinics and the loopholes that I asked him to pay attention to and get closed. He didn't mention the private sperm donation. And I explained, to be honest, I even copied and pasted some posts by donor conceived children, but anonymously, without the names, about their distress from
Mhm.
the site, their distress, and some of them were on antidepressants, and how much that had affected them. And I said, is this how human beings are treated in this day and age under the umbrella of Human Rights Convention and the Children's Rights Convention. He ignored it all and said the government could not legislate private sexual behavior. Yeah, diminish the worth of donor conceived children
Yeah.
completely, and which added to my distress.
Yeah.
Then I wrote to the children's minister. She never replied to me. Then I wrote to NSPCC, a child protection regulatory body in the UK, and I had managed to find the email of their CEO. So I wrote to her directly with all this, and she replied saying, I'm not familiar with this at all. This is the first time that I've heard about it, but you should not have messaged me anyway, but the general email.
Oh,
Like she didn't want to know.
yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have just been trying to advocate for yourself and for others who might be in your
Yeah.
situation. And I appreciate you taking the time to share your story and expose how awful, deranged, vile this could really be. And as a warning to others about our actions and how they affect our children, both inside and outside the fertility industry. But thank you so much for reaching out to us, for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for
Mhm.
having me.
Mm.